Emma Quinn always boarded the 6:47 a.m. Route 18 bus at the corner of Maple and 3rd, cup of instant coffee cooling in one hand, satchel containing half-graded essays tugging at the other. The ride to Midtown Prep took exactly 26 minutes when lights were kind, 34 when they were not, and Emma measured those minutes in the blur of scrolling news feeds and the background hush of collective exhaustion. The regulars rarely spoke. The teenager with purple headphones bobbed in the aisle seat. The gray-haired man in the trench coat dozed against the window, and Emma, like everyone else, became a commuter shadow, present yet barely visible. On a drizzly Tuesday in November, the usual driver called in sick. A replacement swung open the accordion doors, grinned as if the dawn belonged to him, and said, "Morning, folks. Name's Carlos Benitez. Make yourselves comfortable. Got a little surprise once we hit Greenwood." His voice held both warmth and mischief, the way a favorite uncle might announce dessert before dinner. A few heads lifted, but the cabin soon settled into its customary hush. Greenwood Avenue marked the first traffic light long enough for messages about transfers and delays. Instead of the standard monotone announcement, Carlos clicked on the intercom and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your 3-minute storytelling session. Today's tale concerns a sparrow who thought he was invisible." Emma glanced up from a half-written comment about comma splices. The teenager with headphones pushed one ear cup back. Someone in the rear coughed with curiosity rather than bronchitis. Carlos wove the sparrow's adventure with gentle humor. How the little bird, convinced no one could see him, stole shiny buttons from a tailor's cart and felt triumphant until the tailor began leaving crumbs on the windowsill, proving kindness could notice what vanity ignored. When Carlos reached the punchline, turns out the sparrow wasn't invisible, he was simply unacknowledged, which is not the same thing at all. The light turned green. He signed off with, "That's the story. Have a good ride and be kind." The bus rolled forward. A hush lingered, but it was softer, like a quilt rather than a wall. Emma found herself smiling at the satchel as if it had told the joke. She caught the teenager's eye in the dark window and exchanged a shrug that morphed into a grin. At Midtown, Emma stepped onto the curb feeling oddly lighter, unable to explain to her students why the day seemed shaped like possibility. The next morning, Carlos was there again. "Good morning, rolling theater fans," he said, tapping an imaginary microphone. "Story precisely 3 minutes at the next red light." Passengers boarded with an expectancy that tasted of cinnamon and second chances. Even Trenchcoat Man stayed awake. That day's story involved a baker who gave away the imperfect pastries nobody would buy, only to discover that the city's lonely ate them with gratitude that sweetened their own lives. The baker eventually opened a cafe called The Second Batch, where nobody paid the first time because everyone deserved a trial run. Carlos's voice painted sugar dust in the air, and when he concluded, "Remember, imperfections can be invitations," a soft applause flitted through the rows, tentative but real. By Friday, Emma arrived early enough to secure the seat closest to the driver's cabin. She watched people file on with expressions common to theater lobbies. The teenager, Jalen, she learned, had ditched the headphones to listen better. Mrs. Park, a retired piano teacher Emma had never heard speak, carried a Tupperware box of homemade sesame cookies for Mr. Benitez if he doesn't mind stories crunchier than his own. Gavin from Trenchcoat Land turned out to be an attorney who, according to his business card, specialized in property disputes but secretly wrote limericks he'd never dared share. He offered Emma the window seat with a courteous "ladies first," and Emma laughed, "Only if you'll rhyme about it later." The story that day featured a broken traffic light stuck on yellow. Rather than causing chaos, the endless caution forced drivers to slow down, wave each other through, and notice the mural on the corner wall they'd sped by for years. When a storm finally fixed the circuitry, No one rushed the intersection anymore. They'd grown addicted to courtesy. Sometimes malfunction is just mindfulness, Carlos closed, braking at Union Station. By the second week, the 3-minute interludes had become ritual. Passengers began timing them, guessing genres and debating morals the way sports fans parse replays. Carlos never repeated a plot. He spun folk tales from his Dominican grandmother, urban legends repurposed for optimism, and real incidents he'd witnessed polished to a gentle gleam. Monday might bring a suitcase lost and found by a dog who returned it in exchange for squeaky toys donated by the grateful traveler. Thursday might unveil the legend of a street lamp that flickered Morse code love notes between star-crossed tenants. The change within the bus was gradual yet undeniable. Smartphones stayed in pockets longer. People offered seats before being asked. When Jalen dropped his geometry workbook, Gavin kneeled to gather pages, then ended up explaining adjacent angles all the way to 14th Street. Emma shared a spare pair of gloves with Mrs. Park on a frosty dawn and received a folded origami piano in return. Someone slid a fresh bouquet into the empty space beside the driver one morning. Sunflowers co-opted as mascot for the rolling theater. Only one rider seemed immune. Douglas Wilkinson, a stiff-spined insurance adjuster who boarded at Jefferson. He maintained that storytelling violated the transit code. He wore noise-canceling earbuds and filed manicured complaints on the city app. Emma overheard him once. "Buses are for transport, not kindergarten." His frown might have powered the vehicle if diesel failed. On the 18th morning, Carlos delivered a folk fable about a fisherman who apologized to every fish released back into the lake. "Courtesy travels further than hooks," he concluded. Applause shook the handrails. Douglas stood at the front exit, phone poised. "I've recorded this. You are diverting attention from driving," he declared. Carlos replied calmly, "Hands are on the wheel, eyes on the road. Been doing this 20 years, sir." 2 days later, a crisp memo appeared inside the bus. Transit Authority Policy 4.06. Unnecessary announcements. Any deviation required supervisory approval. Carlos folded the notice like a dangerous swallow and tucked it behind the fare box. The next morning, he greeted passengers with his usual warmth, but no hint of plot. Emma felt a collective inhalation. Carlos drove in silence to Greenwood, stopped and activated the intercom. "Per regulation, storytelling may be discontinued," he announced. A ripple of protest surged. "But rules also allow important public service messages. This is important." He took exactly 3 minutes to relay facts. 30% increase in passengers boarding early, 20% decrease in onboard altercations, and 100% increase in cookies gifted to drivers. His deadpan statistics masqueraded as narrative, proving point with laughter. Emma watched Douglas typing furious notes, but gladness beat like wings. When Emma stepped off at Midtown, she halted, impulse quickening her pulse. She spun back to the open door. "Mr. Benitez, may I tell the story tomorrow?" she asked. His eyes widened, then softened. "Only if you promise to keep it at red light length." Emma spent the evening rewriting a childhood anecdote about her first teaching day when a shy student had secretly corrected her chalkboard spelling with a smiley face sticker, turning embarrassment into mentorship. She trimmed it to 289 seconds and practiced while timing kettle whistles. At the next dawn, she stood near the front, hands slightly tremoring. Carlos nodded her onto the small step beside his seat. When the bus halted at Greenwood, he handed her the microphone. "Morning. I'm Emma, regular passenger, first-time storyteller," she began. She felt dozens of eyes, but also the cushion of collective goodwill. She told how mistakes could plant the seeds of vocation, how that sticker still lived in her desk. "Kindness," she concluded, "doesn't erase errors. It underlines possibilities." Applause felt like a warm tide. Even Douglas blinked as if dust had invaded his certainty. Others volunteered. Mrs. Park narrated how music cured her husband's dementia fog for 10 precious minutes each night, urging listeners to sing loudly, even badly. Gavin unveiled a limerick series about the bus itself, ending, "Though the seats slightly squeak, we find what we seek in 3 minutes of tales every week." Jalen performed a miniature slam poem about skateboard wheels defying cracks, preaching resilience. Each speaker honored the 3-minute rule, calling themselves Benitez Briefings, a term that stuck. The petition began organically, scribbles on scrap paper, digital links passed down aisles. By the following Monday, 312 signatures demanded the Transit Authority approve Route 18 as a pilot culture commute. A local journalist boarded, recorded a session, and streamed it. Views soared. Hashtags bred war rolling theater. 3-minute miracles. Pressure fell heavier on Carlos, who remained impishly serene. Stories drive themselves, he joked. I just steer. Conflict escalated 10 days later when a safety inspector named Ms. Hanover boarded unexpectedly, clipboard clutched like a gavel. She wore a neon vest of authority, rode silent until Greenwood, then stood at the yellow line. "Operator Benitez, I'm here to evaluate compliance," she announced. Carlos nodded, palms firm at 10 and 2. "Welcome aboard. We're about to begin our scheduled 3-minute session." "No unauthorized announcements," Ms. Hanover reminded. Carlos flicked the intercom toward her. "Then perhaps you'll tell the story, ma'am." A few passengers chuckled, quick to hush. The inspector's cheeks considered blushing, rejected the idea. "I am not part of this performance." "Understood," Carlos replied. "But the red light's on, and silence is also a narrative." Emma felt the bus collective leaning forward. She rose. "May I speak?" She invoked civic courage she previously reserved for parent-teacher conferences gone volcanic. Without waiting for permission, she faced the cabin. "Once a city bought buses so people could arrive at work," she said, voice trembling but clear. "Turns out people are more than employees. They are mothers easing grief, teenagers practicing courage, lawyers rediscovering rhyme. A tiny slice of story reminds us. Ironic that a commute designed to move bodies now moves hearts. Please, Ms. Hanover, measure that value too." Silence followed. A taut, expectant wire. Carlos tapped the brakes as the light shifted, but the inspector raised a hand. "You have 30 more seconds," she allowed. Emma finished with a promise. "We guarantee your regulations. 3 minutes, full attention on safety. All we ask is the chance to keep sharing." Ms. Hanover sat back, expression unreadable. The bus exhaled. Inspection lasted the rest of the route. She noted hand position, mirror checks, turn signal timing. At Harbor Terminal, she disembarked, saying only, "Report will be submitted." That evening, local news aired footage of Emma's speech, overlaying graphs of commuter satisfaction compiled from social media. Douglas was interviewed outside his office. He adjusted his tie, conflicted. "I suppose it's harmless," he conceded. "I still worry about distraction, but the stories do lighten the trip." The ruling arrived on a windy Wednesday. The Transit Authority granted provisional approval for Route 18's 3-minute storytelling program, citing positive civic engagement and negligible safety impact. They referenced Clause 7.2, operator discretion in community building initiatives, previously dusty. The memo ended with an unexpected flourish. Other routes may apply. Carlos taped the letter above the fare box like a medal. That morning, he donned a paper crown labeled King of Short Fiction, clearly a gift from Gavin. He bowed at each passenger. "Today's tale," he announced, "isn't mine, It belongs to all of you. He recounted in mosaic fragments the sparrow, the baker, the endless yellow light, Emma's sticker, Mrs. Park's nocturnes, Gavin's limericks, Jalen's wheels, and even Douglas's caution. The bus became the protagonist, engine throbbing to the rhythm of shared narrative. He concluded, "A vehicle is just a story that moves, and riders are chapters writing each other." Applause thundered, the sort that ricocheted off metal and into marrow. Emma felt tears spring, embarrassed at first, then unashamed. She saw Douglas clap, stiffly, 2 beats behind, but unquestionably. Mrs. Park wiped her glasses, muttering, "Dust, only dust." Jalen hooted. The weeks rolled on, and Route 18 acquired nicknames: Story Bus, Kindness Coach, Fable Cab. Other lines experimented. Route 42 added Joke Junction Fridays. Route 7 hosted Minute Meditations. Media attention faded as novelty dispersed across the network, but the original remained a quiet legend. Emma noticed more subtle legacies. Parents rode with children expressly for the stories, turning commutes into mother-son dates. Passengers exchanged recipe cards or job leads. Someone left a yarn basket near the rear seats. Scarves sprouted like vines along the windows, free to take if winter surprised you. Once, when an elderly rider collapsed, every passenger moved with practiced camaraderie. Gavin calling 911, Jalen directing foot traffic, Emma comforting with a steady hand. It felt scripted by kindness. Not every day glowed. There were still delays, spilled coffee, a shattered phone screen, and enough ordinary irritation to remind them perfection was fiction. But even on the worst mornings, Greenwood Avenue meant a red light, a voice, and 3 minutes that reset the clock. Spring unfurled panes of sunlight through salt-stained windows. Emma now taught a creative writing elective inspired by micro-memoirs. Her students rode Route 18 once a month to practice. They stood at the front, palms sweating, and told the city about the first taste of independence or the secret worry inside a bold facade. Applause became homework. Carlos remained pilot of this gentle revolution, though he deflected credit. One afternoon, Emma stayed late to grade papers and caught the 7:15 p.m. bus instead. Carlos was off shift, seated behind the yellow line as a passenger. Another driver narrated a story about constellations shaped by imaginary bonds. Carlos listened, beaming, his own creation now bigger than his shadow. Emma sat beside him. "Strange being on this side of the wheel?" she asked. He shrugged happily. "Stories drive themselves, remember?" She considered the phrase. "Were you always a storyteller, or did you wake up one day and decide commuters needed fairy tales?" Carlos scratched his chin. "When my daughter was little, she hated morning daycare. I'd tell her a 3-minute story in the car to ease the drop-off. She's in college now. I miss the ritual." He gestured at the bus's humming interior. "Thought maybe the city could borrow it." Emma pictured a young girl clinging to the last sentence before goodbye, and a father promising the next installment tomorrow. She felt privilege in inheriting that promise. At Maple and Third, she disembarked into evening air scented by blooming azaleas. She walked home slower than usual, reflecting on how the city's bones seemed kinder, as though bus routes had become arteries delivering small doses of empathy. Summer approached. Tourists began boarding with cameras and guidebooks marking, "Take Route 18 at least once." A visiting poet from Montreal composed haiku on ticket stubs and left them in seat pockets like fortunes. The mayor rode incognito, or so he thought, until passengers recognized him and insisted he tell a story. He obliged with a childhood anecdote about losing a spelling bee on the word mayor. Press photos later showed him laughing, tie askew, humility shining. One humid dawn, the traffic system malfunctioned. Red lights flickered out across downtown. Greenwood, their usual stage curtain, stayed green. Passengers muttered, "Would there be no story?" Carlos improvised, slowing to crawl, turning the absence itself into narrative. "Today," he said over the intercom, "we prove that stories don't need a red light, only a heartbeat willing to listen." And he shared a tale of fireflies guiding travelers through dark woods by blinking not in unison, but in conversation. As he spoke, Emma watched the bus's digital clock. Exactly 3 minutes. Regulation observed, spirit intact. She realized then that the rule had never been the red light, nor the duration, nor the intercom. The rule was communal attention, strangers pausing long enough to witness one another. A moving capsule of simultaneous listening. Autumn would come, and Carlos might retire someday, but the ritual would outlive its founder. Someone else would tend the flame, because kindness, once lit, spreads like daylight through cracks. On the final school day before summer recess, Emma's students boarded for their showcase ride. They spoke of first loves, secret comics drawn in margins, grandparents who smelled of cardamom. When the last student bowed, Emma turned to Carlos. "Do we have time for one more?" He glanced at the traffic signal, amber blinking toward red. "Always." Emma stepped up. "This is a meta-story," she began. "It's about a bus driver who kinda saved a teacher from cynicism, a lawyer from silence, a teenager from earbuds, an elder from isolation, and maybe even an inspector from unchecked severity." She caught Ms. Hanover sitting near the back, for she now rode weakly, smiling ruefully. He did it in 3-minute doses, proving small isn't the opposite of great, just the seed of it. As Emma finished, the light changed. The bus lurched forward, carrying them through ordinary streets charged with possibility. Applause did what applause always does on Route 18. It turned metal and vinyl into cedar and velvet, transforming the morning commute into theater once more. And somewhere in the city, another driver waiting at another intersection tapped an intercom, cleared a throat, and began, "Good morning, passengers. I'd like to tell you a story.